Question: do you teach Apokatastasis, which actually is the idea that the world has fallen below its original state that it was created in, but it will inevitably be restored to that state at some point? Will even the archdemons be restored into full divine original state? I wonder what will happen to them then, and all poor traumatized people who lost themselves to evil. I have a hard time believing anyone is out of reach for God's healing. Well, I understand especially the last sentiment. I have a hard time believing anyone is out of reach for God's healing. I used to feel that way myself for many, many years. And what helped me resolve it was actually really coming to a different worldview than this apokatastasis. And I've explained that view in my video about how the world was created. So if you really want to grasp this, watch that video, because it gives you a much more in-depth understanding of the world than what you get from most other places, especially this apokatastasis. Because what I explain in this video is the world wasn't created in a perfect finished state that it has to return to. The world was created, as I explained, in a certain state. The earth, for example. There was a certain original state that the earth was created in. But then it was not a finished state. There were beings who were sent into embodiment on earth, and they are designed to be co-creators. And therefore take the earth from its original state and raise it up to a higher state. And that then is the end state for the earth and for the universe we are in. I explain that again more in the other video. So the point here is, the earth was created at a certain state, beings were sent in here, but they were sent in here with free will. And in the beginning, they built onto the original foundation, but then there came a point where this shifted, and now they started using their free will to go into what I call duality and separation. So that means they now took the earth below the original state, and that's the situation we have today. The earth is below, quite far below, the state it was originally created in. That's why you have many religions that have this myth about a lost paradise. That is valid enough, but the paradise was not a perfect state. It was just the original state, which was higher than what is there now. So it's correct enough that the earth is meant to be returned not just to its original state, but actually to its highest potential. But this can only happen by free will, by the inhabitants on earth raising their consciousness. And this has been happening. That's why you see progress in terms of democracy and human rights and humanity. So this is the reality of the situation. The return to an original state is not a guarantee. It's not something that God will come in and say, oh, now I'm raising up the earth. This is up to the free will, and it may take a long time, and there may eventually come a cutoff point, as I explained in the other video, but that's some way out in the future. Certainly not next week. So returning to the question, will even the archdemons be restored into full divine original state? Well, I don't know what the person asking the question specifically means with archdemons. But it sounds to me like it's a little bit like you see in some Gnostic teachings, where you see this idea that the world was created with a basic polarity. There is a God and there's a demiurge, or devil, as it would be called in Christian terminology. And then there are some archdemons on the opposite side of the God, and then they go into a lower state where they perpetrate evil. And this is, again, not, it's not the way it is, as I explained in the other video, because, again, everything is free will. There is, as I explained in the other video, some beings that chose to go against the upward movement. They refuse to self-transcend, and they are what I call fallen beings. And they are not guaranteed to be returned to their original state because they have free will. So they chose to go into duality and separation, and they have to choose to come out of it. But there can come a cutoff point where if they won't choose to go out of it, they can be erased. So simply their identity is erased or recalled or whatever you want to call it. When in my view you talk about demons, you're not talking about these fallen beings. You're talking about a demon is something that in my view was created, for example, by humankind. Where if you, for example, war, if people engage in war, they are feeding their attention, they are feeding their energy into a vortex that eventually becomes so strong that it gains a certain rudimentary state of consciousness. And this is what becomes a demon. A demon was not created with self-awareness and free will. It doesn't have self-awareness, it doesn't have free will. It's more like a computer that it realizes it's getting energy from people when they engage in war, for example, or many other things. And so it's always trying to push people into engaging in war so it can gain more energy. It's really just a non-aware being that is trying to get people's energy. And then there's all the poor traumatized people who lost themselves to evil. Well, the whole idea, as I explained in the other video also, is that as we individually raise our consciousness, because we're embodied on earth, we are pulling up on a collective consciousness. And that means that it becomes more easy for people to choose to leave behind their identification with evil and choose a higher awareness. But it's still free will driving everything. So again, there can be beings who started out, they were given self-awareness and free will. And they can go so deep into duality and separation that they're not willing to bring themselves out of it, to climb the path out of it. And they can eventually be erased. But it doesn't mean that their experiences were lost because, as I explained, all of your experiences are really in your higher self, your I am presence. So even if somebody, the conscious you, is lost, the I am presence has still grown. But as I say also, I have a hard time believing anyone is out of reach for God's healing. But as I say, nobody's out of reach for God's healing. No matter how low somebody goes in separation, the Christ consciousness is there. It can offer them a perspective that helps them take the next step up. But they have to be willing to take it. So there's always a potential that anyone, even the fallen beings, can be healed. But it is up to their choices. And so really what helped me overcome this wanting to have everyone be saved was that I understood the worldview that I have explained here, but I also really come to understand that free will must be allowed to outplay itself. And there will be some beings that will not choose to grow and transcend themselves, and they must be allowed to do that. But of course, the nature of the situation is that if you choose not to grow, you're starting a clock that's ticking. You can't indefinitely postpone growth because, as I also explained, there comes a point where the entire sphere we are in, the entire universe we're in, is ready to ascend. And if there's a planet where beings are not ready to ascend, they can't ascend with it. But you can't hold back the majority either because of a small minority. And that's why I explained they can then fall into the next sphere that's created. So, my worldview is just has, in my estimation, it's not mine, it's the Ascended Master's worldview, but it has far greater explanatory powers than any other spiritual teaching I've come across in all my time on the path. So if any of this seems interesting to you, watch that video about how the world was created, and it will give you a much broader perspective on it.